Hello. I think I'm on here live. Hello. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Frances Walker and I work for myself, my own business in the Food Intolerance Dietitian, where I see people with lots of different intolerances. And one of the biggest intolerances that I actually see is dairy intolerance. So this is what my quick little session is going to be on. Now, I know a lot of you out there in the audience will have dairy issues, not just because I'm talking about it, but because it is just so incredibly common for people who do have issues. So now, just a quick biochemistry lesson or a food lesson, because when you have food sensitivities, at the end of the day, you've got to become a little bit of an expert with food. So foods are made out of protein, fat, and carbohydrate, and they're the macronutrients. They're the things that make up food. Foods are made up of a combination of these. So when we think of a bread roll, we think of carbohydrates. And yes, it is mainly carbohydrates, but it does have a little bit of protein and does have a little bit of fat. So it's made up of the three main macronutrients. And yes, I've just got a little thing popped up here from Lauren. Hi, everyone. So the team are excited to introduce me, Frances Walker, who I'm talking today about dairy and lactose. And I've had a little bit of premature start on this little talk. So I'll thank you, Lauren, and I'll continue on my little spiel. So I was just talking about how foods are made up of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And I've introduced the old bread, which is mainly carbohydrates, so a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat. And then we have a food like tuna, a lovely big tuna here, which is, we think of it as a protein food, and it is. It also naturally has fat in it, not just the fat added, and it has a tiny little bit of carbohydrate. And then we look at foods like rice bran oil, which is pretty much pure oil. Might have a tiny little bit of protein and carbohydrate that's snuck in there. But again, foods are made up of this combination. And the reason why I'm going on about this is that, got bread all over my desk here, is that milk is no exception. Milk is made up of a bit more of a balance than the foods I've talked about. It is definitely got carbohydrate in there in the form of lactose. It's definitely got fat in there because when we choose milk, we choose low-fat milk and normal fat milk, which is 4% fat, and skinny milk. So definitely we know about the fat in milk, but milk also has protein in it as well. So we're going to look at both those two things. And it's really important to understand that because I find a lot of people this is the basis of really getting down to your dairy issues, is understanding that you can have issues from the carbohydrate, which is lactose, and you can also have issues from the protein, and you can have issues from both as well. So this is something that's not always that well understood. So let's clarify this. Okay. So not only does milk give you protein, fat, and carbohydrate, but it's actually really nutritious. So, it's baby's first food, isn't it? So it's going to provide lots of vitamins and minerals like vitamin A and calcium, which we know about. And milk is beautifully set up to be the first food for us and for, all mammals. However, it is basically, in terms of our evolution, it was supposed to be food for babies, and all babies in the human race and all mammal babies are able to break down the lactose, which is the sugar in the milk that we were talking about. And they need to because they need to get their nutrition from milk. In fact, babies having lactose intolerance is really, really, really rare. It's incredibly rare. And where it does exist in like almost single-digit numbers, those babies will not survive unless they're given milk with a lactose breakdown that has already broken down for them. So we all start off with as little babies with having enough of the enzyme to break down the lactose in the milk. But somewhere along the line that changes. And in Australia, we have 4% of adults, and they're mostly women, are actually lactose intolerant. For the Caucasian Australians, and for the non-Caucasian Australians, it can be incredibly high, like around about 75%. And so we have this different sort of ability in our in our genetics in terms of the lactase, the enzyme that we make that breaks down the milk lactose. So, in relation to this, lactose is actually made up of two sugars. You can see my lovely pre-made lactose here. It's made up of glucose, which we've heard about. That's back to front. And it's made up of galactose, which you may not have heard about. And so let's assume that these scissors here is the lactase, the enzyme that breaks it down. So when we drink milk, it goes down into our mouth and down into our esophagus, into our stomach, and into the small intestine. The small intestine is where all the breaking down of food occurs and the absorption. So that's where all the action happens for getting our nutrition. So in the small intestine, the lactase enzymes come along and they very effectively cut that lactose up, which is absolutely brilliant because now we have them in their separate little sugars, the glucose and the galactose. It's kind of really weird doing this. And in that form, they're little single sugars, and they can be absorbed across the gut wall and go into our blood, and then we can use that in our body for various things, including fuel. So that's wonderful. That works really well if you have enough of the lactase enzymes to cut it up. And as we said, we are all born with enough of this, but as we get older, some of us, it's part of our evolutionary history, we lose the ability to produce the scissor lactase enzyme because in a way we were brought up through evolution times not having to rely on the milk. But at some stage in our evolution, there was a mutation which basically allowed humans who were, this is back in our ancestry, big time, who were able to be settled on the land and who were growing cows and what have you, growing cows, they had cows, and they were able to use that for their nutrition and they were able to survive better. So that sort of came somewhere around Northern Europe, was that mutation. So the people who have enough of the lactase enzyme are the mutants, actually. That's the normal pattern is to not to. So what happens if you've got a down regulation of your lactase enzyme? So you're not going to cut down your lactose. So when that is delivered and you have a glass of milk and you're going to have about 12 grams of lactose being delivered into your small intestine, and it's not going to be broken down, or it's not going to be broken down very much. So it depends how much of this you have. Some people who are lactose intolerant do have some do not have much at all. It's like a scale, it's on a spectrum from mild to quite severe. So, but we all do produce some of the enzyme. It's just a matter of how much. So this little beauty can't be broken down in the small intestine, so it moves on into the large intestine, but we can't absorb it across the gut wall. It's too big. We're not set up to be able to absorb lactose. And when it makes its way into the large intestine, it's in there in much greater, some might escape naturally, but it's in there much greater numbers than it should be. And it draws water into the gut. It's called osmotically active because it's a little carbohydrate. And a lot of that is presented to our gut microbes, which love it. They lap it up and they rapidly ferment it because it actually is a FODMAP. And they ferment it and as a result produce more gases. So we've got all this extra water pouring into the gut and we've got all this extra fermentation occurring, and we don't do so well with that. And so what happens as a result that we can end up with stomach pain, diarrhea. Some people can actually get constipation, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. Also excessive gas. And so they're the symptoms of lacto intolerance. Now, normally, as I said, we normally have this lacto intolerance issue because we don't have enough of the enzyme. Sometimes if you've had some surgery on your gut or some gut trauma, or sometimes I see people who, particularly they might be kids, they might be babies, they might actually have something else happening in their gut. They may have an intolerance or an allergy to another food protein. It's causing their gut to not be so happy. And if it's not so happy, it's not working so well. And thus we can actually, that little lactase enzyme sits very precariously in the small intestine at the end of the villi. So it's sitting there. So if you're going to have sort of contents of the inside the gut that's racing through the gut, it's going to slough off that enzyme, and it takes a while for the specialized cells to make that enzyme. So what I'm getting is that you can have a secondary lactose intolerance that can occur in babies and can occur in children and can occur in adults. But that's only short term, and soon as the gut is sorted, then the lactase enzyme will come online again, and you'll be able to break down the lactose in milk. So there you go. We have the two different types of lactose intolerance. Okay, so also we talked about the milk sugar that can cause problems for lots of people, quite a lot of people. But when I see people in my clinic here, they often come and they say to me, oh, I've got a problem with dairy, and I have to try and tease out, is it a problem with the lactose or is it a little bit more? So I ask a few questions, you know, tell me about what's happening with you, tell me about your symptoms. And symptoms is a good one, because usually with the lactose, it's all more to do with the gut. But if there's some other symptoms, some little oddities about that, like, oh, I get a bit of congestion, or I feel really unwell, I feel very fatigued, I get this sort of mind fog, and I feel, you know, quite unwell, then I'm sort of say to them, well, you may have an issue with the lactose, but there may be another issue happening. It might be the milk protein. And so let's have a look at the proteins in milk. So there are two major types of proteins in milk. There are the casein proteins, and there are also the whey proteins as well. You've heard of that, casein and whey. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet eating her curds and whey, and they are the main proteins in milk. So the casein ones those proteins make up 80% of the proteins in milk, and they can cause a lot of allergy issues, either very severe ones or not severe ones. And out of those casein proteins, there are about 8 different ones there. And so these are the curds. So these are that when we make cheese, for instance, we use mostly the casein proteins. And the byproduct, the waste product from that cheese making process is called whey. And once upon a time when they used to make cheese, they didn't know what to do with the whey. It was like they used to feed it to the animals. It was waste, literally. Until one day someone had a bright idea, because I thought these whey proteins are really cheap proteins that also exist in milk, and they started to use it in foodstuffs and in supplements, and that's where people come across it. And that's how often people actually work out they've got protein issues to dairies. They take a lot of protein supplements containing whey and find that they have these massive reactions. You know, they're sneezing, they're puffing up, they're getting hives, and you know, that's how they're able to zone in on that. That's what their problem is. I've had that. I've talked to a few people who've had those issues. So the whey proteins take up 20% of the proteins, and there's 5 different whey proteins. So we've got 7 different casein proteins. We've got 5 different whey proteins. And if you have an issue to proteins in dairy, you could have an issue to any one of those proteins. Or you could have an issue to a combination of those proteins. And this is what makes it so individual. So you might have an issue with the gamma casein protein in milk, which is one of the casein proteins, as well as the alpha lactoalbumin. So, you know, and the next person may have something different. So it's really, it does make it a bit tricky. But on top of that, and I'll just grab this picture here, when you have these proteins, you can see this picture going this way that I'm pointing out. Isn't that weird how I think I'm pointing at the right thing, but I'm not? There you go. So there's one of those proteins in milk, and you can see how it's all curly and it's got a 3D shape. And so what that means is that sometimes when you have a protein allergy, you may be reacting to the actual shape of the protein, or you may be reacting to the individual little units that make up the protein, the amino acid. So if you or your child or your baby is having an issue with milk, say, but it's okay to have some baked milk or even baked egg in a food, then what's happening there is that individual is reacting to the shape of that protein. And when we cook the protein, it breaks apart the shape, it denatures it, changes that, and so it's not allergenic anymore. It's not going to cause those issues. So that's why you get all these different scenarios happening around protein allergies. Whereas if you have an allergy that is reacting to the little amino acid sequences, then it doesn't matter if you're going to cook it or if you're going to change it. The sequence is not going to change. It's still going to be there, and so they're still going to react, whether it's cooked baked milk in a biscuit or whether it's milk in a cup. So there you go. There's the dairy story around dairy. There's the protein allergy story with milk and dairy products. But interestingly enough, though, when we're talking about the whey protein in milk, is that's also the component that has the most lactose. So when we're actually making cheese and we're getting rid of the whey, then that cheese has a much reduced lactose. And for those who are lactose intolerant, you've probably worked out that you're fine with certain amounts of cheese. You're fine with cheese because it's got minimal lactose, but you're not fine with milk. Also with cheese is that cheese goes through a ripening process. So the bit of lactose that is in there, in the casein part of that milk, is actually changed to lactic acid. And so in cheese, it's got virtually no lactose whatsoever. So, which, I find quite interesting. Again, so you get this crossover between lactose and protein happening. Now, I just want to go over the symptoms that you have if you feel that you're getting headaches or sinuses, congestion, fatigue, muscle pain, fuzzy brain, eczema. Whoa, I seem to have frozen. There you go. Are you there, Lauren? Have I frozen in my picture there? I don't know. I'll continue talking. I don't know what's going to happen. It's the years of, at the moment it's the whole COVID thing, and is the internet going to work? At the moment I'm definitely frozen according to me, so I'll continue, and I'm very energetically explaining something there as well. So if you have those type of symptoms, then in fact you may have a dairy protein intolerance. Okay, so what are some of the other questions that I need to answer as part of this is that if you want to go, I'm back again, still working here. Oh, thanks, Rachel, because it wasn't looking good at my end. Sorry, now they're having, and you can see me fine too. Can you still see me fine? Because it's been silly here and now it's having trouble playing the video. Can someone just give me a little reply on that? I'll continue. That's fine. If you are lactose free, it's very easy. It's very important that you do actually replace those nutrients. We're talking before about how milk is actually a very nutritional food. It's not just the protein that's really important and the fat and carbohydrates in there, but there's other vitamins, and calcium is obviously the one that we know about. So if you are going lactose free, it's easy. We know that can be quite easy in terms of just buying lactose free milk, buying lactose free yogurt, or actually using Greek traditional yogurt, because the traditional way of making yogurt strains out a lot of the lactose. So in fact, often just having normal traditional Greek yogurt is fine if you have a lactose intolerance. Eating cheese is fine, that we were talking about before, but again, ripened cheese. So cheese that is not ripened, like ricotta or cottage cheese or cream cheese, they actually still have a lot of lactose in there that may impact you if you have too much. And so if you're only having a small amount, then absolutely you'll be fine, because most people are fine with about 4 grams of lactose in a sitting. But if you have more than that, then it's probably best to choose lactose-free versions like the lactose-free cream cheese that you can get, which is fantastic. Now, of course, all these lactose-free alternatives have the same amount of calcium as you get in normal dairy products. So you're still going to get all the nutrition that you need by choosing lactose-free, just with the lactose already broken down for you. So, that is absolutely easy. It gets a little bit harder, however, if you are avoiding dairy because you feel it goes beyond lactose and you've got a bit of a protein issue. You need to replace those nutrients, and that is just so super important, because there have been lots of studies that have showed that people who avoid dairy are at a massive, huge risk of getting osteoporosis compared to somebody else who includes dairy in their diet. So how do you do that? What you want to do is that you can use things like plant milks, sure. Yes, you can use almond milk, no problem. You can use rice milk, you can use oat milk, and all the different nut milks that you can get, and the different plant milks. However, I think it's best to realize that these milks are more like water with added calcium. They're not really giving us a lot of nutrition. They're just a handy thing to have as part of our diet. But the usefulness of them is that the ones that have fortified with calcium. So when you buy these plant milks, make sure there is at least 120 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams or per 100 mils of milk. And that will give you, in a cup, 300 milligrams of calcium, which is exactly the same as what you get in a glass of milk. So that is a good way to get your calcium. Other ways to get your calcium is to choose like 100 grams of salmon in the tin, because that has soft bones in there, and that'll give you a full serve of calcium just the same as a glass of milk. Another way is to actually have 60-gram tin of sardines, the little sardine tins that come in little 100-gram little serve sizes. So having 60 grams of those, which is just a bit more than half, will also give you a full 300 milligram serve of calcium. Furthermore, you can also buy tofu that is calcium set, and if it's calcium set, it will have a fantastic calcium content. So you just got to make sure it's calcium set, because the ones that are not calcium set obviously will have very small amounts of calcium. You can use almonds and green leafy, absolutely fantastic, but you need a lot of that to get your full complement of calcium. You actually need 100 grams of almonds, which is loads, and you just need loads and loads of greens. But it's useful to have that in the general diet, because your general diet will give you, your background diet will give you around about 300 milligrams of calcium. So if you're looking to have, say, 3 serves of dairy in a day, then a cup of, say, a plant milk that's been fortified with calcium to 120 milligrams per 100 ml will give you 1 serve. Maybe you can have some sardines with the bones. That'll give you another serve. So that's 2 serves. And if it's actually aiming for around about 2.5 serves, then you probably, if you just generally have almonds and leafy greens in your diet and just a very broad, healthy diet, including eggs, calcium is present in a lot of foods in smaller amounts, and all those add up to be able to give you another serve. But overall, it is good to aim for 2.5 serves of calcium in your daily diet. And if you can't get there, it's really handy to be able to have a calcium supplement. And you may not need a whole calcium supplement, because I know it can be constipating for some. You might just need half, say, a caltrate, which will give you 300 milligrams on a day, every day, or have 1 tablet every second day. So, there are ways and means to get around this, but it is important to replace that calcium. And if it's a child, then obviously we need to replace the protein and the fat-soluble vitamins as well. Okay, I think I have covered most of the dairy issues here. I think, oh yes, one more thing I wanted to say, that if you're eating out and you have dairy issues, if you have lactose issues, then actually taking some lactase enzyme with you and taking them at the point of eating that food that you feel has got dairy in it can be really useful. Just keeping that in your purse. We all look forward to when this isolation ends, so we can go out and bring our lactase with us. And if you want to be having that, some ice cream, for instance, that does have some lactose in it, then you might want to take 1 to 2 lactase while you're sitting down to eat that, just to cover that particular issue. All right, well, thank you for your time today. I look forward to seeing if actually the rest of this video has worked out. It doesn't, not too sure, but we shall see soon. And yes, hopefully you've learned a little bit more about dairy today. All right, thanks. Nice to speak to you all. See you later. Bye.